I feel like imperialism is the system of rule by finance capital and monopoly capital, and war is the method, the primary method it uses to expand its interests. And I think that we're witnessing a period of decline. So in prior periods, war actually, as I stated in the piece, war actually aided the development of the United States. It provided a lot of the wealth that allowed actually labor unions in this country to be able to negotiate better conditions, and that allowed for, unfortunately, a lot of the labor movement to be, a lot of the labor movement and its leadership to be co-opted and funneled into the Democratic Party machinery, which is which is totally apparent in the sad state that the labor movement is in. And but now, this last period of about 3 or 4 decades, the system has been in decline. The economy has been contracting for decades. China is on the rise. And what we are seeing is a state of joblessness has become permanent. The labor participation rate is frozen, no matter how much the corporate media wants to say unemployment is now only 4.5%. There are plenty of mainstream reports that show that it's because the labor force, much of the labor force, has stopped looking. And so we have this situation where war is no longer providing the same material benefits. And I feel like that was actually the impetus for this, election cycle that was kind of unprecedented in a way, because you had a billionaire magnate talking about jobs and war, and then you had Democratic Party so-called independent Sanders talking about, social programs that were unheard of in the political debate in just, 8 years prior. So now what we're seeing are these contradictions coming to a head. And I do think that there's a big opportunity in the years to come, especially as the Trump administration continues to be railroaded and bent over a barrel for the deep state. There's going to be a lot of opportunity given these dangerous conditions that the U.S. is teetering on, these dangerous war policies, that we will be able to develop this connection between the inability of the system to offer anything for working people in the United States, and the fact that the war machine only continues to grow, despite the fact that it has nothing to show for it for the vast majority of people in the United States. So that colonial relationship is really hanging on right now, I feel like, by ideology. And ideology is not enough to maintain in an empire. And that's why we see it crumbling. And I think the Trump administration is just a big step towards a greater and steeper decline.
Okay, 2 thoughts for you. You see, I think, I know, I know that the biggest problem in this country amongst the population, the average, working stiffs, people who work for a living, or people who want to work for a living and they can't get a job. The biggest problem is that they have not connected the dots yet. That when over half, and I've been hammering home this for years, and it's amazing how you write about it, you talk about it, and yet no one seems to really care. When over half of our tax money goes to the military spending, that means that there is no money for anything else. And the Flint water crisis was a perfect indication, Danny, because, and I contacted this one congressman. He was from Scranton, Pennsylvania. He was a Democrat. He was an ex-prosecutor. And at the hearings they had on C-SPAN with this whole Flint, with the water crisis and the emergency management people and even the governor. So the governor of Michigan comes to the hearing, and this congressman, he rails at this guy. He says, you should be impeached. You have done nothing. You haven't done anything to help the situation. And he's going on, and everybody is, really getting, written behind him. And I'm sitting there saying, talk about the fact that there's no federal money coming to Michigan for Flint. Why is there no federal money coming? Why can't they give them the money for the better water? Why can't they give them the money to buy the lead-free pipes? Why? Because it goes to the military. The federal government has no revenue sharing, has no block grants like they used to have. And I called his office, and I sent him a piece to his staff. I never heard from this guy because they don't want to talk about it because, as you said, they're part of the war party. The Democrats, So, I mean, they're not going to talk about it. Well, the way Sanders, well, you know this, Danny, he refused during the year and a half that he ran to ever talk about the military spending.
Which ended up being a grave mistake. It ended up being a grave mistake for him because now what we're seeing with Sanders and what we're seeing with the entire Democratic Party is that it's caving in on itself. It has the only strategy it has to win back its base is to try to wage a war with Russia. So it's obvious, it's clear that the Democratic Party establishment has no solutions. And now we have Sir Sanders running around with Tom Perez.
I can't believe it. My brother called me up.
He's running around with them,
Oh, my God.
And that's because Sanders made the grave mistake. He didn't establish independence from the Democratic Party in his campaign. And, you got to give some credit because he won on the basis of establishing independence from his own party. And that's why he's in office right now. As much as people want to say it was stolen, all that stuff is legitimate.
No, it wasn't stolen. It was the angry white. It was the angry white male and female that were fed up, blue collar and low wage white collar people who normally would vote for the stupid Democrats. Were so angered. 8 years of Obama, so they voted for this idiot thinking that he's a populist. But here's my point. Here's my point, Danny. I felt, and I said this before the election, first of all, I thought that she was going to win. Yeah, I did. In my wildest dreams, I never thought this guy would win. Okay, so I said the best thing for the anti-war and the left is for her to win the election. Let the Democrats win the election because we know what they are, and then we can have more of a street I mean, forget the Republicans coming out and demonstrating the Tea Party against Hillary Clinton. Forget those people. Let them do what they want. But the people like us who are real progressives and anti-war, we could have had a movement started because when she got in, she would have done everything that you write about. So the worst thing that happened is having her lose to Trump because now. If you're going to protest against Trump, you're going to play right into the Democratic Party's hands. You're going to go right back into their umbrella, under their umbrella, and they love that. They're recruiting people. They're sending him all over the country, Sanders, with the other idiot, and they're recruiting people like crazy, anti-Trump, and everything that you and I stand for is going to be totally not even talked about.
It's been suppressed. It's being repressed. I mean, this is what the whole campaign to find out about Trump's so-called completely made-up connections to the Russian Federation has been all about. It's about going after, and they did this with Bernie Sanders. The Democratic Party completely took the rug from out of Bernie Sanders, labeling him a sexist, a racist, and they completely attempted to suppress his so-called populist economic agenda. They're doing the same with Trump and his foreign policy rhetoric in order to completely spoil the narrative and the political conversation on the ground to make it really hard, for people like us to organize. And, you have a good point there because, on the one hand, Hillary Clinton presidency would have been a disaster for the world. But on the other hand, how can we build a movement against war and imperialism when so many people we need to win over are comfortable with the Democratic Party? It's going to have to be discomfort with the Democratic Party that we saw a sliver of with the Sanders phenomenon, but it didn't go far enough precisely.
Okay, Occupy. Well, let's talk about Occupy for a second. But let's talk about Occupy. Right. I want to hear your feelings on that, on the Occupy movement. You want to hear mine first, and then I want you to take over. Okay. So I'm out there on the street corners, and then Obama becomes president, whatever, and all my friends who supported Obama, half of them realized that it was a waste of time, So you have this Occupy movement. So I I reluctantly went to a few of their meetings, whatever they call them. I don't know what they call them. So I go to their meetings, and to me, it was totally ludicrous with the hand signals, and with the consensus. I found I found it juvenile. I found it almost a cartoon. And I'm at the meetings, and I'm playing along. I'm playing along because I'm trying to be a nice guy. I got a lot of my friends there who are trying to be nice. We're all older people. We're in our 60s and 70s, and we're there to give support and to give some ideas. And every time I brought up about the military and about the foreign policy, forget, these kids didn't want to talk about it. They want to talk about their student loans. They want to talk about the student debt, about Wall Street, and about the banks, and good things, really good. But they didn't want to connect the dots to the whole thing with and I went to 5 or 6 of the meetings, once a week, and the whole thing just unraveled anyway. Oh yeah, so we have a Saturday where every Saturday they're going to meet at some square here in Daytona, a park, and then they're going to set up tables, and they have signs. So I said, why don't we go and have our signs against the military spending and the war, the war economy, and they all look at me like I'm crazy. So I'm the only one there. I go out there by myself. I'm standing on the street corner next to their encampment, and they're all hanging out there in the encampment. I'm standing there like a schmuck, 60-something years old, holding my sign, and there's nobody joining me from the group. It's like anyway, that's my experience of Occupy. Tell me if you have any different experience, whatever.
Yeah, I was actually in New York City when Occupy Wall Street started. I wasn't nearly as politically active then, but I was becoming more and more active in the realm of politics, and I did check it out on more than one occasion. I marched in a few of the marches. But I shared similar feelings. The questions of white supremacy and racism were often belittled, but also I feel like there just wasn't an infrastructure in Occupy Wall Street to really bring these questions up. The leadership wanted to pretend there was no leadership. It was an organizational mess. It was a good lesson in a way, because I feel like a lot of people that led Occupy were kind of newly dispossessed in a way, right? They were a lot of people who led it were those who just in the last couple decades or so have begun to feel what the crisis of capitalism really is and how it really affects their lives. But then when you get to the question of war, we're talking about a historical phenomena that parallels the entire development of the United States and its imperialist system. And in order to challenge that, you really have to be able to see your struggle as connected with the war machine and what it does to people abroad and what it does to nations abroad. Because only in that way, by connecting those things, can you really begin to fight and to organize people for a mass movement against the state. Because that's what we're really trying to get at. We're really trying to challenge the power of the elites. In order to do that, you have to challenge the number one and most important feature of that state, and that is war. We have to acknowledge that, especially in a time where, we're closer to a nuclear conflict than we have been maybe in U.S. history, barring the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, I think that Occupy Wall Street, there were positives to it, as you said, and I definitely appreciated those positive developments. It was the beginning of this kind of upsurge among the, 20-something generation in regards to the capitalist crisis at home. But there's still a lot of chauvinism. There's still a lot of narrow white nationalism. Everyone wanted to talk about white nationalism when it came to Donald Trump. But we have to understand white nationalism not as some far-right phenomenon, but white racism as an entire ideology that spans the system as a whole and doesn't leave anyone unaffected. And I would argue that a narrow, worldview of the black leadership class that we talk about in Black Agenda Report is just as motivated by white nationalism as the far right, because we have a black leadership completely indebted and in servitude to the capitalists and the corporate monopolies, which in fact are run by, individuals who are totally and utterly connected and
okay. Here's a question for you.
Here's a question for you,
Danny. Here's a question. Let's talk finances.